Hyannisport, Massachusetts, where the Kennedys live and have lived for the better part of this century. Most Americans came to know Hyannisport during the days of the New Frontier, the early 1960s, the administration of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy. At Hyannisport, President Kennedy found relief from the cares of his office. At Hyannisport, the sailor returned to the sea. This is Charles Blair at the Kennedy compound in Hyannisport, a marvelous place, a vital place of youth and promise. There were 28 grandchildren here when I arrived. I came to visit Mrs. Joseph P. Kennedy and her son, Senator Edward Kennedy, to share with them the beauty of Hyannisport, some memories of its past, and some very special truths which can help us all to build a better world. It is an honor and a joy to spend a day at the Hyannisport compound with Mrs. Joseph P. Kennedy, Rose Kennedy. She was born on July the 22nd, 1890. Of her 9 children, there have been 2 United States senators and a president. She is equally at home with kings and queens and camera crews. Some of our Better World crew had followed Mrs. Kennedy through the long 1960 campaign when she worked tirelessly for her son Jack. Then as now, she never forgot the coffee and cake for the crew. It was an extraordinary experience to be with this woman who, with her family, is so much a part of our history. Hyannisport has been a home for the Kennedys since 1926. Kennedy men and women are fine sailors. Senator Edward Kennedy first took to the sea at the age of 7. His father recalled that the 2 oldest boys, Joe Jr. and Jack, were out in sailboats at Hyannisport when they were so small you couldn't see their heads. Father added, it looked from shore as if the boats were empty. Mrs. Kennedy, what are some of the early recollections of Hyannisport?
Well, we came here before Bobby was born, and we liked the location. It was very convenient to the other houses, so my children would have companionship. And and it was near Boston, so my husband, if he were in Boston or in New York, it was fairly accessible. And the sailing was a great advantage because my husband believed in keeping the children occupied. And they sailed, of course, every day, a couple of times a week here, and then later in Guiana. And the water was warm, so they learned to swim at an early age and were very fond of it, bathing and all that sort of thing. And as he and I were, we played golf. The golf course was accessible. So altogether, it just seemed an ideal place.
And it kept the family together in the summertime.
Yes, because they all enjoyed it down here. And they all had something to do. That seems to be the problem these days, is to find something for youngsters to do.
So the accent was really on activity,
family,
wasn't it?
Yes, activity and family participation. But they all had a very good time too, I must say, because I heard a young man say a couple of months ago that no matter what part of the country he was in, if he got an invitation down here for the weekend, he'd drop everything and come. He knew there'd be pretty girls, because of course my daughters were here and their friends, and he knew there'd be something exciting happening in the athletic field or in tennis, and he knew there'd be good bathing, and he knew there'd be great arguments and discussions about things that were going on, whether Ingrid Bergman was getting fat, or whether it was that Mr. Roosevelt was going to propound a new law for relieving the unfortunate, just yes. All sorts of things were discussed, and were discussed seriously, and then were laughed about and joked about, and it was fun, and everybody participated.
What are some of the rules that you enforced in those early days with your children? And
well, they had to be home, you see, when it was dark. It sounds ridiculous now.
Is it true that you had clocks in most of the rooms?
Yes, Mr. Kennedy was very strict about being on time for meals.
For no excuse?
No. Well, I mean, a legitimate excuse, yes, but it comes straggling in. At mealtime, they were supposed to be on time, or they would serve only the course that was being served at that moment, whether it was vegetables or dessert or fruit, whatever it was. Jack was usually late. My sons, of course, they were much stronger than Jack, the late president. He was rather skinny, we used to say, growing up. We'd always save the best piece of meat and the best sauce and everything for him. No one else was jealous because he was so thin, he deserved the best of everything. People have said that was poor discipline, but he was so, as I said, thin that I pretended I didn't really know very much about it.
What about competition? Did you encourage your children to not only compete at sea, but let's say in other matters, at school, etc.?
Yes, we did, because, as I said, it was natural. They were quite fond of sports. And I always think the influence of the oldest child is very important. Our oldest son was a good athlete, and he had a good sense of what was right or what I wanted to have done and my husband wanted to have done. And he was a very good influence on the family, and I think that's very important. And as they grew older, if I didn't like the young man with whom my daughter was going, I'd ask my son to tell my daughter, because I thought that his point of view would be perhaps more influential than mine. Or if she had too much lipstick, little things like that. I think if the oldest ones are brought up in the way you want the family to go, it's a great help to the parents.
With your background of training these children, what advice do you have for mothers and fathers of today?
I think, of course, it's much more difficult. But I think if you explain to them why you want certain things, I would try to do that. They might go sailing, but if there was a heavy fog, they might get lost in the fog. Therefore, not to go when there was fog, or to let us know what part of the harbor they were in. Gradually through the years, they began to realize that what we suggested made sense, and we were proven right, and so they did cooperate.
1960. John and Jackie Kennedy cast their votes on that great November day. Throughout the difficult 1960 campaign, the Kennedy family worked together, drew strength from each other. At Hyannisport on election night, they shared the worries and the joys as John Kennedy defeated Richard Nixon by the narrowest of margins to become the 35th President of the United States.
And I can assure you that every degree of mind and spirit that I possess to the long-range interests of the United States and to the cause of freedom around the world. So now my wife and I prepare for a new administration and for a new baby. Thank you.
On November 8, 1960, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, 43-year-old son of Rose and Joseph, became the youngest man ever elected to the presidency. Mrs. Kennedy, I think all America can remember some scenes in front of this fireplace. Can you share with us some of those moments as you recall them?
Well, it was a very informal picture that was taken after election. The morning after election, we all were told that there was going to be a family picture, and the children all came, of course. My daughters, they were no longer children, Bobby and Teddy. And Jackie was there with Jack, and she had on a red dress, and I had a red dress, and I thought they'd clash. They would have clashed if the right colors reproduced. But fortunately, when the colored picture was shown, they seemed to blend quite nicely.
The great American dream
Yeah.
is for a mother to have a son to be president.
It's just too overwhelming. But I always say, you can't tell what mother or grandmother will be in this, or which of you men might have a son or a grandson of president. That's why the United States is so wonderful and so thrilling.
Our visit with Mrs. Joseph P. Kennedy at Hyannisport will continue. For Mrs. Kennedy and her family, Hyannisport is cherished as the place to return to. The Kennedys have long been a family in motion, with Mother right in the middle of things. Kennedy children have never been sheltered from the outside world. They have been taught to involve themselves, to right the wrongs they see. London in the 1930s. Joseph P. Kennedy served his country as ambassador to Great Britain, chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission, and chairman of the United States Maritime Commission. Ambassador Kennedy taught his children to serve as well as to lead. A familiar scene in the 1930s was Mrs. Kennedy and her brood off to England to visit with Father. The tall young man was Joseph Kennedy, Jr., who lost his life in World War II. There's young Ted, and Bobby, and Jack, about to kiss his sisters goodbye. Ambassador Kennedy loved to take young Ted and Bobby to the London Zoo. Here they are on opening day 1938. Edward was the third Kennedy to become a senator. Joe Sr. had hoped Joe Jr. would involve himself in government. After Joe Jr. died in World War II, Jack picked up the mantle. He became Senator Kennedy of Massachusetts in 1952. And in 1956, young Senator Kennedy, cheered on by his charming sisters, was a prominent candidate for the vice presidential nomination of the Democratic Party. Pictures at Hyannisport. The President and his Attorney General, Robert Kennedy. When President Kennedy was assassinated, Robert picked up the mantle. By 1968, many Americans thought Bobby Kennedy would be our next president. The California primary was the key primary for Robert, and he was at his best in California. The Mexican and black Americans of that state saw him as a liberator from oppression. He told them he would change things, and they told him they would help him do it.
Ladies and gentlemen, George Bernard Shaw once wrote, "Some people see things as they are and say, why? I dream things that never were and say, why not?" And that's what I think
Robert Kennedy won the California primary, but like his brother Jack, he too was assassinated.
Bobby, of course, was inspired and really had a great future, would have had a great future, I think, because he had a different point of view from either of the other boys or any of the other boys. He was deeply concerned, as we all know, with minority groups, and he was an indefatigable worker because he had a wonderful physique. And he was most conscientious. I think Jack was interested in history because he had always read a lot of history and thought a lot about it and how he changed the world from a historical point of view. But I think Bobby, having so many children, and after visiting places where children were hungry or were deprived of some of the necessities of life, he was deeply moved and was firmly resolved to use all his efforts and his strength and everything to correct some of those abuses. I must say, though, with all my children, I think they enjoy what they're doing. So perhaps they don't deserve as much credit as they get, because they do get a great deal of pleasure and a kick, as they say, out of trying to affect changes in the government.
Mrs. Kennedy, everybody, I think, that belongs to the Kennedy family are extremely busy. The senator, of course, and you've been very active, especially in your interest in the mentally retarded.
Oh, yes.
And mentally retardation has been one of your concerns.
Yes.
May I ask you, do your daughters share this with
Oh,
you?
yes. And again, Mr. Kennedy had sort of a plan. He thought that he would build clinics or schools in places where my children lived. So when Mrs. Lawford was in California, there was a clinic out there. My daughter in Chicago, there was a big school there. And of course, we have several in Boston and New York. My daughter Eunice was instrumental in France in awakening a new concern for the retarded and gave them an idea of how important physical development was. So it's been a most rewarding experience for all of us.
Seems to be a constant accent on self-improvement, never stop.
Yes.
Is that true?
Yes, that's true.
Do you still play golf occasionally?
Yes, I still play golf. Oh, well, every day.
Every day?
I swim every day.
And how
But
often?
I'm very lucky I can do all these things.
You still go
But
to...
I still read, and I'm interested, and I think it's important. And I think they have very good things on TV.
Is it true you still listen to records late at night?
Yes, I listen to the records.
As to...
And I keep notes on...
May I ask you, if it isn't too personal, what kind of records you listen to?
Oh, well, these are French and German, and then I listen to the TV when they're discussing...
To improve your French and your German?
Yes, and to get different, different voices. When I'm because I've studied French and German for 65 or 70 years. I always say to children, don't get discouraged if you can't speak French after 2 or 3 years, because I've been studying it for 65 years and I can't speak very well yet.
Our visit with Mrs. Joseph P. Kennedy will continue. John Fitzgerald Kennedy of Hyannisport stirred the nation and the world in his inaugural address, January 20th, 1961.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. My fellow citizens of the world, ask not what America will do for you, but what together we can do for the freedom of man.
Mrs. Kennedy, you've had some great moments in your life.
Oh, yes, wonderful.
Some of the highest moments perhaps a mother or a grandmother could ever have. And yet you've suffered as perhaps few have suffered. And you've been an example to so many, far and wide, not only in the States, but around the world. Is this the result of your deep faith in God?
Oh, yes, I think so. And then I made up my mind I wasn't going to be vanquished by, I might be defeated, but I wasn't going to be completely annihilated, or whatever the expression is. I don't believe, and I think a great many people through the centuries have had that resilience of spirit and that will to keep on. Otherwise, people would have collapsed years ago. I don't think I'm particularly unique. I've been probably heralded because I was in an exalted position on account of being the mother of famous sons. But I think the world is full of people who are doing God's work in a simple way. Like even Milton said, they also serve who only stand and wait. I think faith is a wonderful thing, and as you know, I've had every advantage, but I found as I grew older, and even when I was young, if you have the faith, you have a certain confidence, you have a certain security. And if you don't have it, I should think you would be so forlorn. So that if children have it, or young people have it, then I always say, do nurture it and hold on to it, because it is so important.
You're a very happy person. Is this the source of your
Yes.
happiness and inspiration?
Yes, of course it is, to a large extent. And then, as I said, we had that card, one of Jack's favorite quotations from Ecclesiastes, where God says there's a time to mourn, but there's a time to laugh, and there's a time to weep, and a time to dance. He wants us to be happy and to enjoy the advantages which He's given all of us. And then, as I said, faith is a wonderful gift, and it is a gift, and I've told them that, and told the grandchildren that. Some people have it stronger than others. One of my children said to me the other day, well, Mother, you've got very strong faith. It's very easy for you to pray and go to church. It's more difficult for some of the rest of us.
Mrs. Joseph P. Kennedy. She spans a century of Kennedys who have enriched our lives and brought us a better world. Tomorrow's Kennedys, full of vigor and wonder, strong and sound, 28 grandchildren. Their strength is not drawn from wealth of family or political position. Their strength is drawn from faith and family love, mutual respect and sharing. Children of Eunice and Jean and Pat. Children of Edward and Robert and Jack. Children of Joseph and Rose Kennedy, who have given so much to those who have given so much to us. This is Charles Blair. Our next Better World will continue the Kennedy story. We'll visit at Hyannisport with Senator Edward Kennedy, and we'll have a preview of the magnificent John Fitzgerald Kennedy Library rising along the banks of the Charles River in Boston, the site selected by the President. Please join us for Part 2 of Better World, the Kennedys.